Are we in for a treat today? I'm really looking forward to today. We're at the wonderful, tremendous JCB Lakes. We're on the North Lake today. I've had some fantastic days fishing here, and I want to show you guys all about method feeder work, fishing up against features and baiting up a line short as well to really capitalise on those feeding fish late on in the session. Another classic JCB Lakes bite. Wasn't actually looking at my tip and it tried to tow my rod, this little beautiful 11-footer, into the lake, and it doesn't seem to want to stop. Every fish we've had so far has been absolutely stunning. The average size must be double figures. It's got to be double figures. So every time the tip goes round, you know that it's a decent fish. And as always, because they're big fish, there's no need to rush what we're doing. We've got decent gear on, balanced kit, and we just need to make sure everyone ends up in the net. Obviously, if this was a match situation, we'd be putting together a massive weight by now. And also, just on a pleasure session or for you guys, it's great to get a fish on the bank and get a nice photo of it, or show you guys on the video. So really taking my time, and the water's quite clear. The water quality is really good on this lake, and the water's still quite clear even though it's summertime. And I just think that means that the fish fight just that extra little bit harder. That's where this lovely through action rod comes into place, because a lot of distance rods, or rods that, you know, generally in the past, rods that I'd be using to cast sort of like 40 to 70 metres, that longer range method feeder territory, quite often they'd be quite stiff, they'd be quite a tippy rod. So the tip would bend, but then the actual blank of the rod would be quite stiff, because obviously you need that power for casting. But when you've got a rod like this, which bends really smoothly all the way through, it just absorbs every little lunge of the fish. So you just can play your fish with a lot more confidence. I think while we're just trying to get this fish within netting range, we can talk to you about sort of like the hardware I'm using. So reel line, because this is generally my sort of like distance style setup, I like to use a thin reel line. I've got 5-pound reel line on. It's a line I've got loads of confidence in. It's an M-Tech reel line, and because 5 pounds quite light, for casting a long way, we would probably crack off on the cast. So we've got a shock leader on of 12 pound of the same material. Here we go. Oh, first time, look at that. And that shock leader not only gives us confidence when we're casting, but when we're playing big brutes like this under the net, we know that we can pile the pressure on and make sure, obviously barring any accidents like a hook pull or anything like that, we know that our kit isn't going to let us down. So that shock leader is really important when on a distance setup. Let's hold this guy up for you. He's another cracking fish. Look at that. That is a beautiful fish. Probably the smallest one of the bunch, maybe 8 or 9 pound. Probably the smallest one today so far, that is. Let's get him back. So let's carry on through the setup. We've already talked about the main line and the shock leader. That shock leader is around 30 feet in length, and all I do to measure that is I do big arm spans, 5 big arm spans of shock leader. I pull the shock leader off of the spool, 5 big arm spans, it's about 30 feet, and then I'll tie a 3-turn water knot to attach the shock leader to the main line. It creates a lovely, neat little knot, slides through the rings perfectly. No problems when you're casting out. You know, it is the ideal knot for a shock leader, super strong as well. Then we get down to the business end. I'm using a little bit of a hybrid of 2 feeders here. I'm using the stem from a Guru feeder with the black elastic in, and I'm using a Preston 30-gram large method feeder. The fish want some bait at this time of year. You need to give them a big parcel of bait. So I like to use as light as possible feeder as I can. This is 30 grams and it's a large feeder, so I can obviously pile the bait around that feeder. Hook length wise, it's 3 inches. Obviously, if you've seen anything that we've done in the past about underwater method feeder work, you'll know I love a shorter hook length. So I think 4 inches is a little bit too long, especially for these bigger fish. So I've got 3 inches of 018 line, I've got a size 12 hook, and on the hair I've got a bayonet that's tied in a big loop, so there's a lot of freedom. And the hook bait, you can see there, is a little wowzer. I've got loads of confidence in these hook baits. They balance beautifully on this hook, so they go into a fish's mouth when he sucks up those pellets around the feeder. I think a lot of the time when a fish is picking up your hook bait, it's actually coincidental really. It's probably trying to suck up your pellets and your hook bait goes into its mouth by accident. You might notice that I've changed the link between the elastic and the hook length from a ring that comes originally with the setup to a little snap link. That is purely to give me a bit more movement with the hook length. It also means changing the hook length is a doddle. So there we go, that's the hardware sorted. I'm going to have another chuck out, see if we can catch another one of those hippos. Right, so we're fishing. Just took that out, it's gone on the spot. Just set the stopwatch. Always like to use a stopwatch, even though the water's warm now. We're summer fishing. I'm expecting these fish to be feeding quite hard and the bites becoming quite quick, but I've noticed we've been waiting a long time for bites. So getting a stopwatch going and just giving us a bit of a read on the day. I think is really important. What I want to do and what I want to talk about while that bait's in the water is I just want to talk about moulding a spare feeder, because it saves a load of time, especially in a match situation, to mould a spare feeder, and also just means that you can get everything dead right. And obviously if we get a bite now, it doesn't matter, we can pick up and reel the fish in, but I think getting a feeder moulded while the bait's in the water is a massive time-saving exercise. So first thing to do, put your little washter or your wowser or your little mini boilie on the spike. Always make sure I spike it lengthways. That means that it's not causing any problems with the gape of the hook. That can go into a fish's mouth nicely, and the gape isn't inhibited by the size of the bait. You'll notice that I've not pushed the spike all the way in. I want some movement there, so I've tied that little spike in a loop, and I want movement there. And every single time before I cast it out, always make sure that it's sitting correctly in my little tub of water on my side tray. And the way I want it sitting is I want the wowser to be sitting upright, but the hook to be laying flat on the bottom. That to me is perfect. So I like to use a mould, and I always like to use a mould just to regulate the amount of feed that I'm putting into the swim. I also think it neatens everything up. So first thing to do for me is to place a few pellets in the mould. Then I'm going to lay my hook bait in that little pile of pellets. It's only a really small layer of pellets, that initial layer, and then I'm going to fill the mould, and we're going to brim the mould today, so we've got loads on top of the mould. We're going to push this feeder in, and because these pellets have been prepared this morning and they're really soft and nice and spongy, when we pop that out of the mould, we've got a lovely compact soft ball that will break down really quickly. You can see my hook bait right at the top of the ball there. I think that's really important. Some of these bites, some of these fish can come to that method feeder straight away and start sucking bait off that feeder. And if that bait isn't at the top of the feeder, it's going to get missed. If it's down at the bottom, you'd be surprised. Micro pellets can get on the hook point, and it's going to stop the hook penetrating in the fish's mouth. So by having the hook bait at the top of the ball, it means you're going to get faster bites if a fish does come in the swim and attacks that ball really quickly. Now for me, it's not quite ready, that ball, because what I want to do is just give it one extra little squeeze. I'm not going to squeeze anywhere near the hook bait. I'm going to squeeze at the top. I'm going to try to do it as neat as possible. I'm going to squeeze at the top, and also going to squeeze at the bottom. And that just means that those pellets are gripping the feeder at the top and the bottom, but importantly, where that hook bait is, the pellets are nice and loose, and they're able to break down quick. Carp get turned on by a pile of pellets. They don't get turned on by a rock hard ball of pellets sitting on the bottom. So we want those pellets to break down, create a carpet with our nice semi-buoyant hook bait smack bang in the middle. another bite that nearly gave me a heart attack. It's brilliant. You sit here 4 or 5 minutes and the rod just literally folds in half. And I'm telling you, if you're not watching, you've got a massive chance of losing the rod and the reel, the lot, as the rod butt hits you on the chin and disappears in the lake. Absolutely brilliant. What we'll do is we'll talk about bait now, because as with all fishing, it's massively important, especially at this time of year when the fish start to have a chew. So we're putting micro pellets around the feeder. I like to soak my micro pellets on the morning before I leave for a venue. So that means they get loads of time to soak in any water. You need a minimum of an hour for those pellets to soak in the right amount of water, become nice and spongy, nice and soft, so they can go around the method feeder, but they'll still break down nicely. The trouble is, if you try and rush that process by adding too much water, you could end up with really sticky pellets, and they could just stay around the method feeder in a big ball, and that's not what we're looking for. So I take an EVA bowl, pour in my amount of pellets. Today I'm using the F1 Sweets from Dynamite. Really nice pellets. I'm not cutting them with anything today, I'm just using a F1 Sweets. Maybe in the winter I'd use 50-50 Carp pellets and F1 Sweets, but for this warm water fishing, it's F1 Sweet all the way. And then I just want to cover the pellets with water, so I can just see the water sticking out through the pellets. I don't want to saturate the pellets, I just want to soak them all through so each pellet sees some water. Give the EVA bowl a shake, set it aside for a couple of hours, and you will have perfect pellets when you come to start fishing. The reason I like to do it in an EVA bowl rather than a tub, you could do it in a tub, but it means that when I'm driving to a venue, or if I brake quite harshly, maybe something runs out in the middle of the road, the bait tub isn't going to spill over, and if it does, I've got an EVA tub with a lid. I'm not going to get pellets everywhere. And likewise, if I'm on the bank, I just think the EVA tub keeps everything out of any rain or any sun, and it stops your pellets deteriorating throughout the day. Hook bait wise, we've got one of my favourite little hook baits, and I'm not adverse to using small hook baits even for big fish. Today I'm using a 5mm yellow Wowser. It's a semi-buoyant hook bait. It's all the rage at the minute to use semi-buoyant wafter style hook baits, and they are absolutely brilliant for fishing with the method feeder, because quite often a fish will come up to the bait, one big suck, really is after your micro pellets, but because your hook bait's semi-buoyant, everything goes in the fish's mouth and you've got him straight away. It's just an added bonus. Another beautiful fish. It's just an added bonus with that hook bait that it's a lovely visual colour, and the fish can home in on that hook bait as well as sucking up the pellets. The only other bait I've got with me today is some 8mm pellets. These are the F1 Sweets again, and I fancy later on in the session we'll be able to catapult some pellets out onto sort of 20-metre line, 18-20 metres out. There'll be a lot of baits put on that line throughout the year, with anglers fishing pellet wagglers maybe, or bombs, and I just think casting a method feeder onto that line over the top of those pellets is going to be a brilliant way of catching some brilliant late fish. Let's hold this guy up for you. Another fantastic JCB carp. Load of common carp today, not so many mirrors, but a load of common carp. All look fantastic in the sun. Lovely fish. So I imagine we'll have another half hour or so catching fish on that far line, and then we'll up the feed on that shorter line, get ready for a last hour of salt on that shorter line, hold on to your rods, and hopefully we can catch some hippos there. We've had a brilliant session, we've caught loads of fish casting to that far bank, but I want to maximise the session, and I think these fish are coming to loads of food. So we started feeding that 20-metre line with 8mm pellets. We're just using the F1 Sweet 8mm, and I've been catapulting them out quite aggressively. 3 pouches of pellets every sort of like 2-3 minutes, hoping to keep the fish on the deck. Now, we've been doing that for maybe half an hour or so, and I'm itching to have a go. There should be loads of pellets down there, but what I want to do is, before I cast my method feeder out, I want to make sure that I'm fishing over some bait. So I'm going to repeat the process. I'm going to go out and probably put in 15 or so pellets, in the pouch, 3 lots of maybe 15 pellets. I've got my method feeder all ready to go, and I'm going to try and cast it exactly where those pellets have gone. Oh, spooked one then. It was obviously near the surface after those pellets. Now this is exactly the same setup as we're using on the far side. So we've got that method feeder with the shock leader. We've got this beautiful 11-foot rod, which, to be honest, is just at home doing this sort of thing as it is casting a long distance. So this is the ideal setup. The only change we have is I've changed the hook length, because when I'm fishing in this way, feeding a lot of bait, I want to sort of match the hatch, and I want to use one of those 8mm pellets as a hook bait. The theory being that if my micro pellets get disturbed off the feeder, hopefully there'll be a lot of fish on the bottom and they'll be wafting around, the fin movement. We might not be fishing with the ideal presentation straight away. We just had a little indication then. So if those pellets do get disturbed, we've got an 8mm pellet on a short hook length in amongst a load of other 8mm pellets, and that means it's really likely to get picked up. So I always like to match the hatch when we're feeding a lot of bait. I've got exactly the same hook length, same size 12 hook, so 0.18, a size 12, but this time I've just tied it with a bait band on the hair. So that means I can slip one of those 8mm in the bait band and we're fishing straight away. That's a really good sign, because this is the first cast on this line. We had a little indication then. The idea behind the method is we've been feeding those 8mm, we've rattled in some 8mm, we've created some attraction, some baits on the bottom, and then we're chucking our method feeder over the top, and that's going to be the cherry in that pile of bait. You know, hopefully the fish are grazing over those 8mm, then all of a sudden they come across this lovely parcel, this lovely soft parcel of micros with another 8mm pellet in the middle, and the rod tip gets towed round. Now you notice there I've not clipped up, I'm just guessing the distance by eye. It's only a short distance, because the bites on this could be savage. We could be, you know, getting a rod pulled round and nearly into the lake. So we want to make sure we're not fishing to a line clip. You know, it's an easy cast, it's only a little short lob. And I'm hoping that after half hour or so of regular feeding, there's a few fish waiting, but if not, we'll probably go back to fishing that long line again, and then we'll come back to this line maybe a little bit later. I just know that at some point during the day, this line's really going to kick off, and I think to capitalise on those fish that are obviously feeding today, we could catch a really big weight by doing this. Well, we were getting liners from the moment that feeder went in, so there's obviously a few fish settled over those pellets. Strange old bite, little, just like a flicker of the tip. You know, the tip just flickered as if fish was maybe nodding its head a few times, and then it certainly woke up now. God, and this is the reason we don't clip up on this line, because ideally I want to be reeling the other way rather than the fish taking me for a ride around the lake. There you go, I think he's turned around now. Hopefully you'll notice that while the feeder was in the water, I mean, the feeder was only in the water for maybe 3 or so minutes, but whilst it was in the water, we weren't feeding any bait over the top. Our bait was on the bottom, our method feeder was on the bottom, so the last thing we wanted to do was rattle in pellets over the top of this feeder and risk bringing those fish up in the water. So we fed those initial 3 pouchfuls of bait, cast our method feeder over the top, and like I say, the feeder was in the water for 3 minutes. I'd have maybe waited till about 5 minutes on that cast and then repeated the process. So I'd have reeled in, fed those 3 pouchfuls again, and then once again cast the method over the top. But it just shows we've been raining baiting for the last half hour. I bet we've fed probably half a bag of pellets in the last half an hour, so we've not been shy with the bait, and they've really responded to it. I always feel that on that line, that 18, 20 metre line, the reason fish are there, it's not near any feature, it's not near any area where the fish feel safe. So the only reason the fish could be there is because they want to feed over the bait that I've put in. So for me, feeding bait is a must. And at this time of year, I think you've got to have an area where you're attacking the swim. It's all very well casting a method feeder out and just letting the method feeder do its job, but you know, where's your edge? And feeding your bait and getting your timings right, that's your edge. I think you've really got to have an area where you're making a difference and you're feeding bait. Yeah, we've caught loads of fish across to that far side. That's a natural holding spot. But if I was in a match situation, I really wanted to pile the pressure on, it'd be the last sort of like hour or so spent on this shorter line where you'd really do the damage. You know, if we could put 5 to 10 fish in the net to go with those early fish that we caught, you wouldn't be far away from winning some money. And it's always the case as well, when you're feeding quite a lot of bait, the fish tend to be bigger, and this feels a rather large fish. I've had it to the net 3 or 4 times and he decides that he wants to spend his time further out in the lake. Keeps going on these nice long runs. As you can see, nothing special, nothing complicated about the gear. We're using the same gear that we used for method feeder across there. Nice, soft through action rod, and that's the key when you're fishing for carp. Stiff rods are a no-no. You want something that's nice and soft, nice and forgiving. Obviously you don't want it to bottom out, so a big fish you don't want it to bend through and you feel the cork creaking in your hand, but something that bends through and you've got steady pressure throughout the blank, that is what you want to see. Oh, here's a nice fish. Not many mirrors today, all been commons, but beautiful fish. Because we've got the old Polaroids on and we can see quite far down in this clear water. Everything looks brilliant in that clear water. We've had all sorts of fish today. We've had fish that go on an initial long run, then give us a right tussle at the net. And then we've had fish like this that every time we get him close to the landing net, he decides that he wants to go on another long run. So really fit fish in here, really fit fish. Here he comes. Oh, only just goes in the net. Beautiful fish. What a stunning start to the bomb line. And I'm going to show you something as well, because I think this is something that you've got to start noticing when you're feeding bait. Just hold him up for you, and hopefully you can see there, cracking way to kick off the bomb line. You can see there in his mouth how orange his lips are, and that means he's actively feeding. He's feeding in the silt, picking up those loose fed pellets. So hopefully there's a few more of his mates down there. First thing I'm going to do before I have another chuck out is feed those 3 pouchfuls of pellets again. We'll try and repeat the process. There's loads of features on the North Lake. You've got some really famous landmarks to cast to. You've got a couple of islands that can be a long chuck from certain pegs, and you need the gear to be able to cast that distance, because that's where the fish hang out. There's also a big massive fountain right in the middle of the lake. All year round, this is a really good spot for casting to. Down the arm where we're fishing today, there's a million fish right at the end. This is where the public feed the carp. They feed the ducks with bread, and obviously the carp sit there too. They love getting a free meal. Quite rightly, it's an out of bounds area for anglers. It'd just be too easy, it'd be hooker duck fishing. But the rest of this arm has got loads of features. There's a far bank to cast to, ranging from 45 to 80 metres away. It's a nice chuck. You've got reeds, you've got trees, you've got a beautiful backdrop of the JCB World Headquarters. It's a fantastic place to fish. definitely on this short line now. Literally, that has been in for less than 2 minutes, and the tip is absolutely towed round. And now's the time, obviously, once they rock up on this short line, you can really try and make hay while the sun shines. The light's just started to fade, so I think the fish are just naturally starting to feed on that short line anyway, so it's making our life a little bit easier. Another hard fighting fish. I mean, some of the tussles we've had under the rod tip have been amazing, but sometimes they come in really easy, and then they've been kidding me and then tearing off. Another common. Obviously, I always feel this is a safe method. You know, when you're fishing we could be chucking a pellet wagger over the top of that. We might catch an odd fish doing it, but I always think that with a method feed, we're always fishing, and when those fish come in the swim, you know, they can't resist that pile of pellets, that pile of micros. We've attracted them with those 8mm. Another powerful fish. There we go, he's in jail. And that I think is ample proof that getting your feeding right with a method feeder is massively important during the warmer months. You can't just rely on putting your method feeder in the water. It's a brilliant tool for catching fish, but for actually attracting fish, we need to be feeding bait. Another fish, another beautiful common, just short of double figures maybe, is at least 8.5, 9 pounds. Not quite 10 pound maybe, as long as my arms though, look. A stunning fish. I'm gonna carry on, hopefully slaying a few more fish short. Hopefully you've learnt a few tips about method feeder work, feeding, getting your timings right throughout a session. I'm gonna get this fish back, feed some more bait, have another chuck, and until next time guys, tight lines.